This video is one in a three-part series of how to add and subtract positive and negative mixed numbers. This is tutorial 2 and we're going to look at adding mixed numbers which have different denominators in the fraction. Example 1, and we're going to go through two methods for every example, so this is method 1. So we have 5½ plus 1 and 7/8. 5½ would look something like this, and we can see that we now have 11 halves. So we've changed our 5½ to the improper fraction 11 halves. We then have 1 and 7/8, which we can represent in the diagram, and we can see that this is 15/8. Now, we can't add these fractions together just yet because they have different denominators. So we need a common denominator. So in this case that would be 8. And that means we need to change our 11 halves, 11 over 2, into eighths. So we can do that. You can see the diagram has done that now. And we've multiplied both numerator and denominator by 4 to give us the equivalent fraction 44 over 8. And we keep our 15/8 as it was. We can now add these together because we've got the same denominator. And you can see from the diagram that we've got 59/8 altogether. Now we might want to express our answer back as a mixed number as well. So if we put all the whole parts, looking at all the holes here, we've got 7 holes and 3/8 altogether. Now, here's an example for you to try using this method with improper fractions. So just now would be a good time to pause the video and go and try the example and then come back and see if you got it right. So the example is 2 1/6 plus 3 1/3. Okay, so hopefully you got on well with that one. So we'll go through this together just so you can check your answer. The 2 1/6, if we change that to an improper fraction, we get 13/6. And the 3 1/3 is 10/3. Now we can't add these together at the moment because they have different denominators. A common denominator would be 6. So we keep our first fraction as it is, and our second fraction is 20/6, which is equivalent to our 10/3. We can now add these together and we get 33/6. But you might notice that this fraction can simplify at this stage. So if we look at the factors of 33 and 6, and I'm looking for factor pairs which involve the same number. So in this case, I'm going to use 3 multiplied by 11 for the 33 and 3 multiplied by 2 for the 6. And you can see that the 3's simplify to 1 and we're left with 11 halves, which as a mixed number is 5½. We're now going to go through the same example again, but using a different method. So as before, we've got our 5½ and our 1 7/8. Now, if we look at the whole number part of our mixed numbers here, you can see that altogether we've got 6 wholes because we've got 5 from the first fraction and 1 from the second fraction. We also have our half and our 7/8, which we're adding together. We know that we can't do that just yet because we don't have common denominators, but we can maybe see at the moment that 8 would be our common denominator. So half expressed in eighths is 4/8, and we've still got our 7/8 as well. Adding those together we get 11/8. And altogether, if we try and create a whole from that, you can see from the diagram now that we've got 1 and 3/8. So back to the question in hand, 5.5 plus 1 and 7/8. That is now the same as 6 plus 1 and 3/8, which I've got from my work in here and here. And altogether, 6 plus 1 and 3/8 gives us 7 and 3/8. Again, here's the same example for you to try using this method where we split up the sum. So it would be a good time to pause the video just now while you try that. Okay, so hopefully you got on well with that one. So looking at our whole numbers first, 2 plus 3 gives us 5. We've got 1/6 plus 1/3. And we need those to have common denominators. So we can express 1/3 as 2/6. Adding these together gives us 3/6. And we can see that this will simplify using factors here. And that gives us a half. So back to the question in hand, which was 2 and 1/6 plus 3 and 1/3. And that's the same as 5 plus 1/2, which gives us 5.5. Let's look at a second example now. And again, we'll go through the same example using both methods that I've been through before. So this example, we've stuck with the 5.5, which you can see is 11/2. And this time we've got 1 and 7/9, which you can see is 16/9. Now we can't add those together yet because we still have different denominators, as you can see. And this time I'm going to have to change both fractions here to get equivalent fractions to allow me to add these. So I can change both of the fractions into 18ths. So we can see that the first fraction here, 11/2, is the same as 99/18, and the second fraction, 16/9, is the same as 32/18. So you can see for the first one, I've multiplied both numerator and denominator by 9, and for this one, I've multiplied both numerator and denominator by 2. I can now add these together because I've got common denominators. And that gives me 131/18. Or, as a mixed number, 7 and 5/18. Here's one for you to try, and again it would be a good time to pause the video so that you can go away and try that on your own. Welcome back. So we have 2 and 1/6 plus 1 and 7/9. So expressing those as improper fractions, we get 13/6 plus 16/9. We need common denominators here, which is going to be 18 again. And the first fraction, you can see I've multiplied my denominator by 3 to get to 18. So I need to do the same thing to my numerator, show that it's an equivalent fraction. So 13 multiplied by 3 gives me 39. And for this fraction here, I've multiplied my denominator by 2. So I need to do the same to my numerator, and that gets me 32/18. We can now add the fractions together because they have the same denominators, and that gives us 71/18, or 3 and 17/18. Now we're going to look at the same example again, but using method 2. So as before, we had our 5.5 and our 1 and 7/9. And if we look at bringing our whole numbers together here and then putting our fractions together, we end up with a diagram like this. So our 5 plus 1 gives us 6. And then we have a half plus a 7/9. Now in order to add the half and the 7/9, we need common denominators, which again is 18 here. So we can see we've got 9/18 plus 14/18, which altogether gives us 23/18. But it's useful at this point to express this as a mixed number. So if we look at making that whole there, and you can see that we've got 1 and 5/18. So back to the question in hand, we had 5.5 plus 1 and 7/9, which is the same as 6 plus 1 and 5/18. So our final answer is 7 and 5/18. Here's one for you to try, and again at this stage it would be a good time to pause the video while you go and try that. Welcome back. So using method 2, 2 plus 1 gives us 3. We then have 1/6 plus 7/9. We need common denominators here, which will be 18. So 1/6 in terms of 18ths is 3/18ths, and 7/9 in terms of 18ths is 14/18ths. Altogether that gives us 17/18ths. And going back to the question that we were asked originally, 2 and 1/6 plus 1 and 7/9, well, that's the same as 3 and 17/18ths. So altogether we have 3 and 17/18ths.